Everything we know about what causes type 1 diabetes and how to prevent it in 2024, Part 1. Let's skip the intro because you already know that type 1 diabetes is caused by the loss of the beta cells, the insulin producing cells, and the pancreas. The first discovered environmental factor is breastfeeding, or lack of breastfeeding. In the mid 80s, a paper came out showing a link in Norway between the duration of breastfeeding and type 1 diabetes. So people were like, that's weird. Let's try to see if breastfeeding is protective. And after multiple trials during which moms and their babies were followed, they found a protective effect of breastfeeding over and over again. And when I say protective, the risk was halved when babies were exclusively breastfed for more than 5 months, and the longer they were breastfed, the lower the risk. And while that was happening, they started thinking that maybe there was something else there too. Breastfeeding meant that the kids were usually not getting any substitutes, such as cow milk or cow milk based formula during that time. And we knew at that time that newly diagnosed children have antibodies against the protein in the cow milk, which are beta-lactoglobulin and bovine serum albumin, but not to other proteins in the food. So the question was, does introducing cow milk too early induce type 1 diabetes? And the answer is yes. In 1992, two teams found that introducing formula or cow milk based formula before the age of 3 months increased the risk of type 1 diabetes by half. And then 2 years later, another team confirmed these results and found that the more cow milk protein a kid consumed, the higher the chances of type 1 diabetes signs the following year. The same year, someone finally decided to take all the data that had been produced and to put everything together and analyze the whole thing to get a more solid view. It's called a meta-analysis, by the way. And they consolidated these results for breastfeeding and cow milk protein. Breastfeeding a child for less than 3 months increased the risk of type 1 diabetes by 43%, and exposing that child to cow milk protein before 3 or 4 months increased that risk by 63%, which is quite a lot. But these numbers were severely underestimated since, one, at that time, the studies that were taken didn't look at exclusive breastfeeding, meaning that the babies that were breastfed for 10 months, for example, would have also possibly been fed cow milk or cow milk based formula, thereby skewing the whole result for breastfeeding. And two, they looked at the general population, including the babies that are not predisposed to get type 1 diabetes and who would not have developed it anyway. And indeed, when the kids are put in groups according to their genetic risk, the effect of breastfeeding and cow milk is much stronger for predisposed kids. At that point, scientists didn't really know why that was happening, but they knew that breastfeeding good, cow milk protein bad, and that's pretty much it. Today we know much more, and it's all because of the gut and a handful of proteins. Yo, you wanna help me pay my rent by subscribing to my channel? When the baby gut is still immature during the first months of life, some of the proteins in the milk or the food can leak through the intestinal wall into the blood. And that is what happens with cow milk proteins, notably bovine serum albumin, beta-lactoglobulin, and beta-casein, among others. When that happens, the immune system will detect these proteins in the blood and make antibodies against them to clear them from the circulation because they're not supposed to be there. And guess what gets caught in the crossfire because the antibodies against bovine serum albumin also catch them by mistake. Yeah, beta cells, the insulin producing cells in the pancreas. Whoops. To make it worse, antibodies against beta-lactoglobulin also catch a protein called glycodelin, which is quite important. Glycodelin prevents the immune responses from going crazy and attacking stuff it's not supposed to attack. So when it's not there, more beta cells get deleted. What about beta-casein? Another example of a protein that makes the whole thing bad. There are two forms of beta-casein that are relevant here, A1 and A2 beta-casein. They're pretty similar to each other, and what you get in the milk depends on the genes of the cow who produced said milk. A1 beta-casein has been linked to type 1 diabetes, but not the A2 form, for reasons unknown. The main difference between them is that the A1 form gets cut into pieces when it's digested, and one of these pieces is an opioid called beta-casomorphin 7 or BCM7. By the way, human beta-casein is of the A2 type. It releases mostly BCM9 and a little bit of BCM7, and the A2 type is believed to be the original type. BCM7 behaves like morphine and it can cross the gut wall and enter the blood, but I'm not sure what the opioid activity does anything for type 1 diabetes. But antibodies against BCM7 also catch a glucose transporter on the beta cells, and then the beta cells can't get any glucose in and they starve. By the way, exposure to gluten too late has also been linked to type 1 diabetes, and gluten also releases an opioid called glycodorphin 7, but I haven't read enough to tell you what that does and how that works, so next video it is. Anyway, let's get back on track. Incidence of type 1 diabetes is really high in Finland and Sweden, where the consumption per person of A1 beta-casein is the highest, and it's lowest in Venezuela and Japan, where they don't have as much A1 beta-casein. And this cannot be genetic predisposition alone, because look at Iceland. It also has a lower risk than Finland and Sweden, although they have a pretty similar genetic background. And it's not a correlation to milk products either, because there are no correlation with other types of beta-caseins, just with A1. And A1 beta-casein is not only linked to type 1 diabetes, but to a bunch of other pathologies. I'll do another video about it later. And if you're wondering what type of milk you're drinking, it's probably a mix of A1 and A2. The last protein in cow milk that contributes to type 1 diabetes that I know of is cow insulin. There's a clinical trial here that shows that weaning to a formula without cow insulin decreases the amount of antibodies against beta cells at 3 years old. Basically, their immune system sees cow insulin, wants to get rid of it, but the antibodies against cow insulin also catch human insulin and its precursors, and there's poor regulation of autoimmunity, so all the insulin is suddenly bad. But it's actually possible to reverse that process or prevent it. In a mouse model, forcing tolerance of insulin completely prevents diabetes, and oral or aerosol insulin induces regulatory T cells, the cells that prevent reactions against the self and that are associated with protection against type 1 diabetes. This is being studied in several clinical trials as I'm making this video, and they could bring us a preventive treatment or a vaccine against type 1 diabetes. Check these out. How cool is that? My cat is going crazy. Okay, cow milk proteins you can control, but there are some things that are harder to control, and it's viral infections. See you in the next video for part 2 in about a week. Love you, bye!